Welcome to Tāwara o Te Wai, Water Talk. And in this episode, Water New Zealand Chief Executive Gillian Blythe talks to former long-serving chair of the Ngāi Tahu Māori Trust Board, Tā Tipene O'Regan. An abridged version of the discussion was shown at the Water New Zealand Conference and Expo 2022 in October, where a number of wide-ranging issues were discussed, including attitudes to the Treaty of Waitangi and the long-term sustainability of the taonga that is water. Among his many achievements, Tā Tipene was a major architect of the treaty fisheries settlements of 1989 and 1992. He led the iwi's successful land and sea fisheries claim before the Waitangi Tribunal, leading to the 1998 treaty settlement. In 2022, he received the national accolade of New Zealander of the Year award and was appointed a member of the Order of New Zealand, the nation's highest honour, for services to Aotearoa New Zealand. You can continue listening for the full unabridged discussion.
Tēnā koe e te rangatira, he rangatira mā kaua nui koe.
Tēnā koe hoki e te tuahine. Hara mai koe, me oho mahi anō hoki, ki te whare o te waipounamu te pūtahi o Kaitahu, te runaka o Kaitahu. No mai, haere mai.
Kia ora. Thank you. It's my great pleasure to be here today with Tā Tipene O'Regan in the Ngāi Tahu Te Whare. It's a great pleasure to be here. I thought I would start our conversation and think about and talk about as you were a child and a young man, you learned the oral histories of Ngāi Tahu and then went on to transcribe the books of whakapapa.
Oh, yes, but I would caution you, I was interested in them when I had time with my taua, my Ngāi Tahu or Kaitahu grandmother, my mother's mother. I certainly wasn't pursuing them, and the only whakapapa I really clearly understood was that of my own extended whānau, really on both sides, Māori and Irish. But that was just because I kept hearing it all the time and I was familiar with it. And I loved the time I had with her, which was quite often substantial, in Awarua, or the Bluff. And I was not particularly fixated with those traditional histories or stories. I just kept hearing them and was familiar with them. I was primarily interested in matters maritime, and the fact that my older cousin was the captain of the Bluff pilot boat, and that my grandfather had been a master mariner in both steam and sail, and things of that kind. I had a maritime obsession, and I grew up with that evolving within me, and my time at Awarua was very much part of my personal identity. I didn't really become competent in matters of whakapapa and matters of tribal history until I started studying it in my early 20s.
And so were there particular stories that interested you more than others?
Yes, they were mainly the stories of, again, with a maritime bent, the understanding of weather patterns and the words and terms used for explaining weather and tides and things like that. And a very important influence on my Ngāi Tahu grandfather had been Captain Bollins of the ship Hinemoa and Tūtanakai, the government steamers. It was an official role. He was a government steamer, went around all the lighthouses and inspected the outer islands of the south. And Captain Bollins was something of a family hero, always been quoted by my Tahu, my grandfather apparently, because his uncles, whom I knew, my uncles, whom I knew, his sons, were always quoting the old fellow. So, we'll sail on the tide, God willing and wind and tide permitting. That's what Captain Bollins always used to say to the old man boy.
Yeah.
That sort of phrase.
Yes.
We'll sail on the tide, God willing and wind and tide permitting.
Absolutely.
And that sort of phrase sticks in my mind from those days, because that was the sort of language that I kept hearing from my uncles.
I think I read somewhere that you, your father would take you to maybe a part of the Te Waipounamu and say, explain to me the shape.
Oh yes. Well, my father was a polymath. That's a person who had a learned interest in a very wide range of subjects. Even though he was a specialist surgeon, his intellect was polymathic. And he would go on a walk with me up a hill, and I used to have to carry the two reference books, Cotton's Geomorphology of New Zealand and Lang and Blackwell's Native Plants of New Zealand. What do you think that plant is, boy? Oh, I don't know, Dad. Look it up, boy, look it up. And I have to get the waterproof covered volumes out of my backpack. He carried the lunch, fortunately, and I'd have to get them out and look them up. And he did that all the time with me. He explained the shape of a hill, explained this aspect of geomorphology, the shape of land, the nature and name of a plant. And he had the third volume after Lang and Blackwell's Native Plants of New Zealand was a little book of A.W. Reid's on Māori proverbs and bird and plant names. And I don't know what happened to that, but I've still got the other two waterproof covered texts.
Oh, good. And I hope your grandchildren, have had the pleasure.
They're of a different frame. But they've all got their particular interests and exercises, but some of them share my interests and others parts of them.
Absolutely. In terms of the stories of how Ngāi Tahu moved to Te Waipounamu, are you able to share?
Well, Ngāi Tahu, the Ngāi Tahu people came in a series of three, some would say four, migratory movements out of a general swamp of whakapapa or net of whakapapa from the Heretaunga Mahia, the Heretaunga, the Hastings zone, and down through the Wairarapa and into Tory Channel and the Marlborough Sounds. That was the first wave or movement. That group came under the general brand of Ngāti Kuri, or Ngāti Kuri, named after an ancestor. A connected group who took the name of Tūhaitara was later to come down. And then there was a movement of people called Kati or Ngāti Erekehu, who are typically identified or located around the Banks Peninsula area today. But they spread through the island. That movement took place beginning in the first quarter of the 17th century and came on into this island with Kati Kuri into Kurateo the Tory Channel area. And they set up an establishment on a point called Kaihinu. And the leader was an older man, Pūraho Nui. But the dynamic force was his son, the Maru Kaitatea. And Maru Kaitatea, after whom the meeting house at Takahanga and Kaikoura is currently named, was really the driving force, particularly his father, Pūraho, was murdered by another tribe at Kaihinu. And after which point the whole group packed up and moved towards the Wairau, and then subsequently through a series of events to Kaikoura, when the Ngāti Kati or Ngāti Māmoe, who were already there, only just ahead of them, ceded Kaikoura to them in a well-known traditional ceremony. And they developed a centre based up at Kaikoura, where the Takahanga Marae is today, and the settlement which covered the site of the current Kaikoura Hospital as well. And that was the first significant major movement and occupation of Tahu into the island. They were joined subsequently by their relations from around the Wellington Harbour area, Te Whanganui Atala, their relations of Kati Tū Haitala, now known as the Ngāi Tuahaduri section of Ngāi Tahu. And then later still by people from another grouping, but out of the same swamp of relationship and connection that I've been referring to from Mahia and the Heritonga Basin, called Ngāti Irakehu or Kati Irakehu.
And so when there was the movement, did water play a particular part in that migration?
Only in respect of, to my knowledge, only in respect of fishing grounds naturally outside. Saltwater was one thing. All Māori were interested in that and lived preference on the coast. But the one big waterway that was hugely attractive was Waihora, or Te Keti Ika or Akai Hotu, later called Te Keti Ika or Ruahekehi. But Waihora, or Lake Ellesmere, is in surface terms the I think the second largest water body in the country in terms of area. It's much shallower, of course, than Lake Taupo, but that was claimed very early in advance by a cultural practice called whenua kite, when they were sitting up at Kaikoura wondering what they would do as they proceeded on further south. The Kati Tū Haitara people had a ceremony which they call whenua kite, land that has been seen or discovered, and then the various leaders nominated the parts of where they would move to, because they realised that they were too close to their relations not to become competitive with them.
Right.
And so rather than fight with your kin, they could better move on. There were various other elements in that story which I won't bother with for the moment, but the biggest body of water that was focused on in that process was Waihora, or more widely known in English as Lake Ellesmere, but Waihora means the waters which are spread out. And that had great riches in terms of food. There was not only migratory eel, but thanks to the process by which the bar at the estuary mouth of the lake, the big estuarine lake really, that could be broken. And there was quite a lot of fish caught close to the mouth of the lake, where the lake entered out onto the sea. And so they would have a lot of flatfish, flounder, and fish of that kind, but more particularly eels, which they could preserve, whereas they didn't have a way of preserving flounder so much, but they could certainly preserve eels by the process of drying, or pāwhara, and the pāwhara process allowed them to preserve the eels by drying the skin, and the oil would form a skin, and that fish, or particularly eels, were able to be preserved very efficiently.
Yep. And I think there is sort of watercress and other.
Oh yes, absolutely. There's all the watercress of different kinds all around that area. It was abundant in those, but it wasn't the only place that was abundant in that. That was a major factor of life around Kaipoi, and which was a large swamp with an island in the middle, you could say. The English got the idea for Singapore of Kaitahu.
They've borrowed a few ideas over the years.
Kaipoi was a settlement of that kind,
Yep.
and a great big settlement too, but they surrounded themselves with a swamp, and it was abundant in those sorts of freshwater foods, including the kanakana or the lamprey, and known in the North Island as piharo, other places as Ngāi, but those various freshwater fish, including kakahi, the freshwater mussels, were all carefully nurtured. So places that were very low and wet became major foci. And so Waihora, Kaipoi, a major settlement, largely because of its food resources and its capacity to be defended.
Yes. Yeah. You've been instrumental in developing Te Pai Korako, so the Ngāi Tahu Archive Advisory Committee, I think. Are there particular aspects that you would like rangatahi and manahere to learn? Particular water stories?
I've been arguing that a number of things about our history in those terms. The backstory is quite simple. Ngāi Tahu since 1849, that's about 8 generations back now, have been bringing their claims and their stories against the Crown for performance on contracts of sale. And that was settled by the Ngāi Tahu Settlement Act in 1998, and in 99 was the Ngāi Tahu apology by the Crown. In the words of the late Queen Elizabeth II, the treaty had been imperfectly observed, which is a classic piece of understatement, but she knew exactly what she was saying. And when she signed the apology for the first of those settlements in Ngāi with Tainui, and we had a similar process in 1990 with her at Waikawa, where she focused on our relationships in terms of the treaty and various definitions of it. It goes beyond your question, however, that the settlement was a long time coming, and water has always been at the cornerstone of that treaty claim, or the claim of Ngāi Tahu Te Keremi, because there's so much of our heritage was turned into the claim, or the claim itself became our heritage. The cornerstone element of culture and heritage that survived, whereas Te Reo Māori dropped off, all sorts of cultural characteristics and heritage traditions were pushed back. But in that colonisation process of the 19th century. But the mahinga kai, the food gathering and food practices, many of which involve water and fresh water and its cleanliness and seasonal interactions with native species, those traditions survived. The most obvious one is not to do much with water, but that's the titi, or the mutton bird. But in the water we had kanakana, which I've referred to, the freshwater lamprey. We had plants, kere, watercress. We had a whole range of forest foods which were gathered and harvested and used, and the seasonal cycle was accompanied by a whole lot of rites, customary rites, and which we treasured and which had been protected in the contracts but ignored. But that provided a continual sense of heritage for us, and so water in that sense has always been at the core of our heritage custom and heritage traditions.
For Water New Zealand, we have a purpose statement when we say ka ora te wai, ka ora te whenua, ka ora na tangata.
Indeed, and we could only just support that concept very strongly, and it's at the heart of a lot of our present discussions with the Crown, as the relationship under the basis of the treaty continues to evolve.
I think that's the piece that there is evolution throughout everything, isn't there, in terms of, you know, the movement of Ngāi Tahu into the South Island, and then what's happened since, and the relationship with the Crown, and the relationship with, you know, with Manahiri. It's a great evolution.
Well, it's an evolution. It's not confined to fresh water, of course. No. It's one to do with sea fisheries, and that's why we had quite a lot of difficulty in definition of the negotiation of the Ngāi Tahu settlement of 1998, because the mahika kai, fresh water, is one thing. the Crown, by its actions, had separated these things out into different divisions, if you like, politically. And one of those, the sea fisheries, were defined differently because of the Crown's attempts to conserve the resources by the quota management system. And we had a whole lot of litigation around the application of that. And so the Waitangi Tribunal defined that separately and gave a separate report on it. Whereas on the freshwater, we had great trouble reaching an agreement. And it was agreed that we had a different view of that matter, that we would, in effect, park it, and if the courts were to find in due course that freshwater had some extant rights in it, because politically they would argue no one owns water. But that's a different thing from having rights and interests in it. And ownership is one concept. But if there are going to be ownership rights, and this is the same argument we have with sea fisheries, if there are going to be ownership rights created by the state, then our rights were not going to be limited to a kōwhaiwhai margin on someone else's executive summary. We're going to be in there as a part of that process.
I mean, I'm conscious that there is lots of discussions that are going on, but do you see if you fast forward 20 years, do you see that do you hope that we will have resolved that?
I would hope we could do it before that, but by the same token, I've spent a lifetime. I was first elected within Ngāi Tahu in 1973, and I've been working in an amateur sort of way on the Ngāi Tahu issues, particularly in support of the former Ngāi Tahu Trust Board chairman in Wellington prior to that, when I was a student. So I'm going back into the late 1950s when I talk about that. So I've seen a huge range of change, and the circumstances have shifted, and we've adjusted our sites because of different circumstances. And that's been one of the very great things that's happened in my lifetime. The genius of Sir Geoffrey Palmer as a constitutional thinker is very important in developing the concept in law of the principles of the treaty. So rather than arguing about the actual words, which is an important thing for some scholars to do, he's talking about the principles, and the principles evolve as they survive changes of events, and they survive changes in circumstances. And the principles need to be thought of and applied. And increasingly that's what some of our more intelligent judiciary have contributed to. And we've had some significant evolution in the application and capacity of the treaty to shape the forward evolution of the society as a whole. And so, yes, I think a lot of these things will eventually be resolved. And I think we've made some huge movements in recent years, but they're on a very broad front. The issues to do with water, for instance, are a part of that. But the Crown's official position was no one owns water, and then they set out to create all sorts of legislation which made it look as if someone did own water. and that it was a property, and so that altered the game to some degree. But we would have, as we said with fish, no, Tāwara owns the fish, we have rights to harvest it, but the fish doesn't belong to you till you've caught it.
Yes.
But if you,
And only if you catch
but
it.
if you're going to commercialise or develop a property right with a value in the right to catch it, that alters the whole shape of the discussion. To some extent, that's beginning to happen with water.
You served on the New Zealand Geographic Board for 3 decades or
more.
Or more. For you, what does the role of place names serve?
Oh, well, I think the term taunaha, po taunaha, they are signposts, and huge numbers of them are simply geographic descriptors, but a lot of them also reflect pieces of, or they're the vehicles by which all sorts of historical events are maintained and remembered. There's a place in Murihiku, Southland, near Clinton. It's a funny little hill. It's called, it's like a bump in the landscape. It's called Popo Tuno, and the reference to it tells you this little hill near Clinton, which is quite unremarkable in its shape, was the place where a major set of marriages were organised by the wives of 2 paramount chiefs, Te Raki Ihia of Kati Māmoe and Tahu Tapanui or 2 of Ngāti Haitara, or Ngāi Tahu you might say. These 2 women organised a peace between the 2 tribes, which was sealed by a whole clutch of chiefly marriages between the 2. And if you look at what springs out from that, you find kaitahu today from Kaikoura, the Kaikoura coast to Rakiora Stewart Island, are locked together in a series of the downstream marriages from that time. Now, it doesn't mean to say the fighting stopped necessarily, because there were those who agreed and those who disagreed. But on the whole, that's what's provided the whakapapa fabric of the reality which is our contemporary iwi. We sort of have it accustomed to say there are 9 primary hapu or sub-tribes, but most of us tie to 2 or 3 of those various hapu. And that has also been argued out and fought at a High Court level in a major decision on the iwi case in the Auckland High Court, where the learned judge came to the conclusion that you couldn't have a whānau without a hapu, and at any one time the hapu was a moving feast, because marriages were always taking place between the various members, and the only one you could actually get a boundary mark around really was the iwi, larger group. And it was quite a useful thing, because how do you, when you've got some tribes that call themselves Te Whānau Apanui, for instance, or quite minuscule groups which identify themselves quite independently as iwi, when they're a branch of a wider group, it's very difficult to maintain those boundaries clearly. So the iwi is one you can get a boundary around as a rule, and that iwi or tribal nation is iwi is actually defined in the Williams Māori Dictionary, the last edited. Second to last editor was Aotearoa Ngata, and Ngata said iwi which is tribe or nation, and it's the idea of a nation that is similar to what the Chief Justice of the United States said in his famous decision in the Marshall judgments of 1839, a year before the treaty. He described the Indian tribes as having a bounded sovereignty. They were sovereign to themselves within a context of a wider nation, and a bounded sovereignty. And that is pretty much the idea, I think, of, in contemporary terms, of an iwi as a tribal nation within the context of Aotearoa New Zealand, even though some of my own relations would clearly distinguish between Aotearoa as belonging to Te Ika Māori, the North Island, and Te Waiponamu, this island, as a distinct entity. And there's a lot of our manuscripts from the 19th century support that view in terms of reference. But I think it's worth getting with the message and talking about Aotearoa New Zealand makes very good sense.
Indeed. So thinking about place names and water, do you have a favourite?
Well, generally speaking, if there's I love the Fiordland region and its lakes, and Diana O, the cave of rushing water, has always appealed to me because I see that O, AU. It's also the way of Tory Channel, Kura te ao. You find little things in the nomenclature like that, which refer to the movement of water, that I enjoy encountering. It's a part of the joy of knowing. And if they say to love is to be known, well, is to know and be known, then the elements in place names which betray those things are very special to me. I've got one lovely one that in the 1900s, the Postmaster General and Surveyor General got together and decreed that any new railway facilities and that would have Māori names. Well, they had a place in mid-Canterbury, out in the flat, where they were building the main trunk line, which had a bit of a siding. It's called tio, T-I-O, which is the Māori word for oysters. Oh. And the last place you'd expect to find even archaeological or geological remains of oysters in the middle of the silt plain. And the reason's quite simple, that this place called Tio, which is an official place name, got a Māori name because that's where the gangers building the main trunk line used to have their tea break, and the ganger would call out Tio, and so you end up with a place name like that. And just knowing that gives me a chuckle.
Absolutely.
And I enjoy the knowing of those sort of trivia. But some names are much more evocative, and Taina'o, or Teano, as it's commonly known, is a one which evokes a very important place in our tribal heritage. Then that's the Fiordland and Murihiku lakes.
It's a beautiful part of the world.
It is.
I certainly think it's one of those places where, to be able to transport yourself either in your mind or literally brings happy thoughts.
It does, but it's also, if you know about it, that region is the cradle of New Zealand's creation myth and part of the whole evolution of our place names and stories. And so I'm particularly attached to those place names and those stories. They are the lampposts, they are the marker posts of a culture. And our Kahurumanu, our online tribal atlas, which is free to the world, it's open access. Kahurumanu lists very large numbers of those places and their names and puts the stories behind the names. Not just the meanings, but the stories associated with them. And we build Kahurumanu. It's got about 1,600 fully documented and referenced place names in it now. Some of those packages of reference, you could just about write a book on the place name from the references. But we've got something like 5,500 identified and marked, waiting to be referenced. So there's enough work there to keep the Ngāi Tahu Archives team working on that with interns and so on for several decades to come.
I look forward to exploring, I think. I think for many people that are involved in the water community, being able to look and to understand and to see some of the stories will help with
it enriches our national culture, and we developed it for our own purposes, but we have been astonished at the breadth of take-up by others than us, and people enjoy and feel enriched by that understanding.
Just going back to the treaty and the need to remember, both for tangata tiriti and for tangata whenua, what does the treaty mean for you?
Well, you've used two terms, tangata tiriti. That's the term developed by Edward Jury in a Waitangi Day address many years ago now, in which he identified those people, tangata whenua, who are the people of the land, and tangata tiriti, those people who are here by right of treaty. Mm-hmm. In other words, the importance of the treaty is not something peculiar to and important solely to Māori people. The importance of the treaty is that it establishes the right of other peoples to live as part of this society. And that is a hugely important thing, because it says to the Hainamana, the Hapani, Engari, Katiwiwi, the French, all of those different cultures that have come to this remote part of the world, they have a right to be here because of the treaty. That's why, for our different perspectives and different reasons, we should all put a value on Te Tiriti.
Thank you. You recently attended the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II in London. Looking forward, do you think that Aotearoa New Zealand's future will remain linked to the monarchy because of Te Tiriti? And that was signed?
That is the primary focus. It's in Te Tiriti, rangatiratanga is to do with rangatira. That involves both performance and whakapapa. If you haven't got the qualities of leadership, your whakapapa will be acknowledged, but you will not be followed. But out of that set of circumstances, quite people of relatively insignificant, historically insignificant whakapapa become prominent and competent, and by their deeds you shall know them, sort of thing. They become looked upon by their people as rangatira or rakatira. And rakatirataka or rangatiratanga is a concept which is itself in evolution, but it's got meaning. And the beauty of the present arrangements, apart from its relative economy for New Zealand, the beauty of it is that it has a permanence which is above the ordinary run of politics. And on the whole, depending on how the British Commonwealth performs, in my view, it's as stable and as productive a political relationship as you could get. And it's been shaped to, in large measure, by the judgment and wisdom of our own leaders, our own relationships with them, with full dominion status. We are completely independent. The question is, should we remain within this relationship? I think until you've got a better one, yes. The frailties and difficulties of the free trade relationship with Australia is difficult enough when it comes to dealing with apples, and all sorts of things can come apart on their immigration rules and the difficulties of trans-Tasman immigration. The British thing is sufficiently distant, but remains close in another sense. It's a network of culture and activity which I think has lasted well, and I haven't yet seen an argument for running a 3 or even a 5 yearly contest or occupied by used politicians to have a period as an independent head of state with all the things that go with it. However, just because I'm in favour of that, I haven't seen a productive alternative yet emerging. And so my own view is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But there's a reasonable possibility that we will go through some turmoil. We can't escape the turmoil in the rest of the world, and it is dependent on the United States remaining in one piece as a democracy, and a democracy that we want to relate to. It means that Britain will remain relatively sane in its own occupations. More importantly, I think it means that Australia will play a straight bat and not undertake further underarm bowling. These are all considerations for the future, well beyond my projected lifespan. But I think what we do have at the moment is a rich package of heritage. And you've had a Māori former Archbishop as a Governor-General. You've had a Māori Chief of General Staff, former Chief of General Staff as a Governor-General, and now you've got another Māori woman as a highly reputed academic and administrator as Governor-General. I can't find an argument to dispose of that quite simply into the ordinary turmoil and of rumpity-dumpity interpersonal politics, which characterises most democracies as they ebb and flow in their relative competence.
In the period leading up to settlement, you talked about the need for Ngāi Tahu to undertake a mental shift from thinking about grievances of 7 or 8 generations and then working towards a vision for the future.
Well, once you've fought the claim as a people, 7 to 8 generations, the claim has become, and the grievance has become, the focus of your cultural organisation. You have the removal or settlement of that grievance in some degree removes the grievance. It removes the glue that holds you together. So I have been focused on the building of an infrastructure by which we can store our cultural identity, store our heritage, have reference to it, make it accessible to our people, publication, all sorts of devices which we now have. This interview, for instance, will be an example. The uncut version of that, by our agreement, will go into the Ngāi Tahu archive. And that factor, and we can, as that archive technologically adjusts to new systems, as the present operating system evolves, all of those things will continue to evolve with it. You won't have the problem I had after the first Christchurch earthquake when I found a shoebox full of floppy disks. I call it a floppy disk syndrome because what I had in it was something like, in that shoebox was 30 years of correspondence, articles, addresses, texts, and all sorts of other things. And I couldn't find anyone who could convert it
Absolutely.
to a standard disk. It has now been, thankfully, it cost $300 at the time, but I found one person in Christchurch who could help me, and we saved it. But you don't want to have that happening in any massive shape with your heritage. And so carrying it forward requires a capacity to plan and structure and adjust the recording process. But it's also got to continue to be accessible to your own tribal members. Now, when we made the settlement, we had something like 22,000 people on our rolls. We've now got in excess of 75,000. And a lot of those are young people, and they're living longer. And so, you know, the whole business of holding together this cultural frame of a bounded sovereignty of a tribal nation is more challenging and complex, but we've got tools by which we can hold it together. And that is truly wonderful.
As we look forward, what is your dream for why, for water, and for workers in the water sector in Aotearoa, New Zealand?
My primary dream is not to waste it, to develop a political motivation to store it more efficiently, because ultimately it is the cleanest battery fuel we can ever have. Sir Joseph Ward in the early 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, Sir Joseph Ward, Prime Minister, referred to water as the primary single focus of wealth in this country. Now, he was thinking of it more in terms of water wheels and steam. He wasn't thinking of decarbonisation, but we have enormous resources of water. The shape of this island, for instance, Te Waiponamu, it makes it a machine for the generation of water, much of which we waste simply by spilling it because we don't have a device or model for using it. The more we store, the more we can use it and recycle it and reuse it and do all of those sorts of things. And I think if we're going to have a cleaner, richer and healthier future, we've got to take a very dramatically enhanced view of the storage and protection of water. Now, I've voiced my views about this to you and to others over many years, but I'm very keen to make sure that that we, as a people, as a nation, take a much more enlightened view of the utilisation and maintenance and protection of our natural waters. But we must avoid at all costs the absolute absurdity of wasting it as a device for stimulating a market.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure to talk with you again, Tā Tipene. Can I close by saying, e te rangatira no mātou te tino whiwhi ki te noho I raurau I tō tino mō hiotanga. Nā reira, ka nui te mihi mai oha kia kau.
Tēnā koe tō mihi. So, hoki atu taku mihi ki a koe, me o ho mahi o tō hui nunui o te tau. My very best wishes for your conference.
Thank you for listening to Tāwara o Te Wai. If you would like to listen to our other episodes, you can follow our podcast series on Spotify or find the link on our website.